Welcome back to Humans of Ethereum. In this episode, I have a really fun, engaging conversation with the one and only lyrical polymath, Beltran Berrocal. As his Twitter handle suggests, Beltran is one of the very few humans I've ever met who's able to make equally good use of both his left brain and his right brain. He is a designer by trade, and he's done amazing design work for decades, but he also has deep technical expertise. For example, in the aftermath of the DAO attack, and very similar to Jay Rush, whom I spoke to last week, he did some very important forensic data work. We talk about that in this episode. We talk about more recent work he's done, such as the important Web3 design principles, as well as his work redesigning ENS and the stuff he's working on right now. We also cover a number of other topics, such as decentralized design and democratization of design and access to art and the importance of art and design in society and life. It's a fun episode. I really hope you enjoy it. One more quick important note. This is an extremely visual episode. Beltran is a designer, of course, and so we walk through some visual and artistic designs in the course of the interview. If you are listening to the podcast version of this interview, I recommend either watching the YouTube video version if possible, or else checking out the PDF that Beltran shares. You can find links to both of those in the show notes here. Without further ado, let's kick off with episode 7 of Humans of Ethereum, featuring Beltran Berrocal. Beltran, how are you?
I'm fine. How about you, Lane? Thank you for having me.
Good. I am so incredibly excited to be able to speak to you about this Humans of Ethereum project and just hear more about your incredible story. You know, it's funny. I've done a series of these already, and I've learned so much about the backgrounds of each of the people I've spoken to, even people that I know pretty well. And I've known you for a while now. And so I'm really excited to hear more about your story. So yeah, why don't you just introduce yourself and however you want to, and tell us, a bit about background, right? And kind of what you were doing before getting into the broader kind of Ethereum community.
Okay, yeah. So I'm a designer, but I'm an Italian designer. For us, design is a way of thinking, so that you can apply it to different disciplines, different projects. So I've been doing, in my past life, I had a design studio right out of university. I started working with a few friends, and we did a lot of things like lighting design, product, communication, interior design, interior for the space agency, for the space station.
Wow, that's interesting.
We did a lot of videos, a lot of web. At the beginning, we were the only young designers who could do it. And we also did some interaction design. We created some interactive products sometime before Arduino and Kickstarter. So we had to do all the mistakes in the book. We became entrepreneurs. We asked for loans. We went to China. We fought with the Chinese who assembled the components upside down. I had to learn C++ and electronics in 6 months to develop the ideas that we had as a design studio.
Wow.
And so it was a crazy experience, entrepreneurial experience, that made me learn all the mistakes in the book. So I try now not to do them anymore. And I also help others try to avoid them.
I feel like that's the responsibility of folks like me, and especially you, who have an actual career behind you and have actually had some real world life experiences, which is not true of everyone in Ethereum.
Yeah, exactly. Because you had a lot of startups under your belt.
Yeah, I've made some of those mistakes as well.
Do you want this to be a double interview? Should I ask questions as well?
Yeah,
you are
free.
a human of Ethereum as well.
We'll probably at some point turn the camera around and someone can do a proper interview of me, but feel free we'll keep it casual. You and I are friends, so this is just a conversation.
Yeah, well, I think in the Humans of Ethereum, there should be a chapter about mistakes. A lot of what you are today is also the lessons you've learned from the past, which come from the mistakes you've made if you took the chance to learn from them. So
totally,
yeah, that's one, possibly one chapter.
Yeah, I mean, both a chapter in our personal stories as well as maybe a chapter in, as you said, kind of the Humans of Ethereum playbook.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, we are defined by our failures at least as much as we are by our successes. I agree with that.
So do you have one personal story you want to tell? I don't want to deactivate your interview since it's last 1 hour. I'll do the interview another time if you want.
Sure, let's do that. I like that.
Okay, perfect. So I had this design studio. We did a lot of things. I was also teaching at the same time at the Politecnico and in different university. I like sharing knowledge, doing research and sharing knowledge.
Yep.
And I've always been into looking at technology and the trends that shape consumer tools and products.
Yep.
If you look at those trends, you can see that art anticipates a lot of things. And
Definitely.
so I was teaching these students, hey, or giving them always the same stimuli, hey, why don't you look at this artist project or this designer thesis, very forward looking. It's a toy, but try to think where it goes. And so
yeah.
I developed this new kind of design research that talked about Internet of Things in 2004, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, layering, computational design, interaction design, do-it-yourself, etc. So there was a lot of things, and I've always been interested in a new technology because of that.
Yep.
And there's one other big side of the story to my personal experience in life, which is my father was a sculptor. Quite, you can probably tell.
So there you go. This is, again, I've known you for a while. I wasn't aware of that. I love this. This is fascinating.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
So my father was a sculptor and quite famous and crazy in his own work. He created disassemblable sculptures. I call it art for hackers.
Wow.
They are like puzzle-like sculptures. I can send you some materials. It's easier to see than to tell because they're very complex in their appearance and in the many layers that they have. They have a lot of science, inspiration of science. They have a lot of technology. He was up front researching the new tech in the 60s, 70s. There is a lot of content that relates also to what we are trying to do with the decentralized societies, because in the 1960s, he talked about democratizing art. And so he created the idea of the multiple, so that one sculpture could be edited in 10,000 exemplars, for example.
Wow.
And he made them accessible to everybody. So he became an entrepreneur. There's a lot of lessons for entrepreneur, but there's that idea that anybody should have access. And so there's a lot of ideas that speak to what we are doing in the space, and speak to myself personally. I really think that I am a result of playing with those sculptures since a kid, and playing with art and sitting on the laps of Dali, or hearing my father telling the story of when Andy Warhol took his portrait.
Wow.
And all the stories of creation, that come about with this experience. And
so it's incredible. I have a small number of artist friends, and how do I put it? I'm always inspired when I'm with them and I hear their stories, and I definitely have some of the wildest experiences with them. On the topic specifically of these sculptures you're describing, it sounds like it may be easier to visualize them than to describe them. So later, if you can share with me, if there's any material we could share in terms of a link or a video or images, we can add those in the show notes so folks can take a look at them and experience them.
Sure, for sure. If you want, I can share the screen and tell you if you need to visualize.
If you're watching this on YouTube and not listening as a podcast, then take a look at
Oh, right, because you're going to have the podcast, right?
Yeah, we could do both.
So maybe just no, actually, stop this video. I just wanted to share the screen there. Maybe visualizing is easier.
Yeah, let's do it.
Share. So tell me when you see it.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so this is. Am I sharing it still?
Now I just
This.
see, yes, I see it. Yes.
Okay, sorry, there was a mistake there. So these are the kind of sculptures. This is a tiny torso made up of 40 elements,
Wow.
but it's a puzzle. This implies that there is a project behind. Okay, he worked like an architect with the different layers, and
Yep.
this looks done in 3D, but is actually done in 1972. I like to
Wow.
remind people that there were no personal computers. It was 10 years before Steve Jobs and Wozniak did the Apple II. So it's
Yeah.
completely done by hand. There's
Incredible.
a lot of science. This is a tiny jewel. It's actually yay big. I don't know. So if you see also my
Yes, I
video,
do. Yeah.
which looks like a puzzle. Those of you move the elements. It has 24 elements, two sides, and by the permutation and combination of the elements, you can make up to 112 different sculptures. So you see only four of these.
Wow.
And this is the idea I was telling you earlier on, which is he invented the concept of the multiple. He made the sculpture, for example, in 10,000 exemplar or sometimes different numbers, because he really wanted everybody to have access to them.
Wow.
Really very cheap, like $100 or something. And in the 70s, this is a sculpture of 1969, actually. In the 1969, he had thought of using a bonding curve for promoting the pricing of his work, you know.
Unbelievable.
So the first one was very, very cheap, and as more pieces were sold,
right.
later pieces would be more expensive.
Wow.
But he had calculated that so that it would still be very accessible.
Wow.
And there's a lot you can talk about science, humanities, technology. There is a lot of the idea of his positioning always being towards innovation and between art and science. This is also why I joined the Ethereum system, or why I am personally oriented to thinking about technology and science, but having that human aspect that maybe only technology is missing in a sense. So I could go on and invite you to come to Andalusia.
So there is actually, this is a foundation. So there's actually a foundation that exists today. There's a museum as well. Wow.
Yeah, there's 3 museums. There's
wow.
one big museum unfinished. There's only one wing. This is the wing. There is a workshop where we recently had some net artists, the blockchain net artists, Billy Rennenkamp and a group of guys came and had an informal residency here with us.
Wow.
He can tell you more about it. So we have a library of 5,000 books. There's a collection of the multiples. There's, of course, it's art that you play with.
Right.
And there's a lot of things, of course, happening in this project. This took a lot of time of my past maybe 12 years, because my father passed away. I needed to stop my design studio and take care of his legacy. It's a very important legacy.
Sure.
And so I started developing the foundation, but with this idea of being a place for any kind of creator to come and be inspired and create their work. And so this is one big chapter of my life that I can talk more or less or another time. I'm always inviting you and everybody to come visit me, because I know that when you come and visit and discover this, your mind goes like that.
That's incredible. I mean, that's, I really had no idea that even existed. I think it's fascinating in its own right, but there are clearly so many fascinating connections between your father's work and the work that we are carrying on today, in a sense, right? Both around the democratization, around the interactivity. I love the idea of a bonding curve. Even just the idea that, based on what I saw a moment ago, which of course is just scratching the surface, right? The idea of almost art, what's the word I'm looking for? Primitives, little pieces that can be combined and mixed and matched in different ways, which is, you know, to me, Ethereum is exactly that for kind of society.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
I've been exploring
putting together elements to create a new macro idea of
Yep.
society. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm beginning to explore ideas like DAO primitives and composable DAOs and things like that. And to me, the simplest unit there, I don't know, for lack of a better word, we'll just call it a DAO, is, they're kind of like units of basic social order or social structure, or you can think about them as incentive units. And so how to kind of mix and match and combine them and kind of see what the results are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is nice that you mention it, because that is what actually brought me in full time into Ethereum. I was when the DAO came out, the 2016 DAO. I had heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I was in Miami in 2014 because I had a startup and my partner was in Miami. So I had heard about Vitalik's presentation in Miami. I had missed it, unfortunately, but
Yep.
I was there and aware, but was busy with the foundation. When the DAO came out, I said, I need to join. I need to play with this. Is an amazing idea.
Yep.
It's awesome. It's the future. It's the way to go. It's what the web has not yet fulfilled, and so I was really passionate about that idea, and I convinced a few friends also to be part of it. I put like $20 just to play, just to be able to vote, to think. These guys put a lot more money.
Yeah.
And so I felt compelled to help them recover the funds after when the hack happened. And that is also when I started learning about Ethereum as well, the development and stuff like that.
Sure.
We said, hey, how hard can it be? It's supposed to be there. The data is there. But that's where I discovered that actually it's not as transparent if you need to spend 3 months, 3 different people trying to write parsers for what happened during those blocks, to understand who got what money, where the money should go for the extra balance, for example. And we needed a way to collimate, to make the numbers match. We had 3 different codes. It was Nick Johnson, Buki Puba, and myself working on the extra balance. Only one part of the bigger DAO hack problem, okay? Sure. And during 2-3 months, we had different numbers. So it didn't make sense,
So funnily enough, this was unintentional.
We should.
The previous episode is actually with TJ Rush, and I understand that so his work on his project, which is now called TrueBlocks, was born out of exactly the same experience. So it's funny, we are a small community and everything's connected, I think. So he actually shared his version of exactly the same story, the DAO story, and the 3 different sources of data and how hard it was to find the truth, which is where the name TrueBlocks comes from.
Exactly, absolutely. And when we talked, he mentioned that the reason to start TrueBlocks, it was because my code took 19 hours. So there were different ways to do it. Nick and Buki went through the events and scanned the events, but had different math for the things. I said, we need a deterministic way of saying it. And I wrote a parser that scanned through the archival node all the blocks from the beginning and the end of the DAO fundraising, and read and re-executed the transaction. So that code took 19 hours or more. And so he said, it's not possible. I need to find a faster way. And so it's an interesting story.
So you are the lyrical polymath. You're one of the rare people who has the right and left brains that are both kind of functioning and talking to each other. So you're a very, creative, artistic person, but clearly you're a legitimate hacker as well. I have deep respect for that.
I try, but in this space, I'm amazed that people that have the depth of the knowledge that requires also the protocol development, and there's people that are way ahead. I am just a learner.
Yeah, me too. Learner for life. There is always more to learn, and you can go as deep as you want to down not just one rabbit hole, but many of them, I think. Cool. So keep going with your story. So what happened after the DAO?
So in the DAO also, it was fun, the governance process. I have recorded some of, they are on YouTube, you know, when they were trying to certify their identity by showing their key on the mobile phone. It was early days. There were no standards or protocols of good idea. Aragon was not there. So of course it needed to be an experiment, but it was very, very bad. And that also gave me the feeling that even though the backend supposedly is transparent, or we can make it transparent if we make an effort,
Sure.
okay, the front end, whatever you put on top of it, if it's opaque, that's it, you know? I could on a Web2 page and tell you it's on a blockchain. And so it doesn't make sense, you know? There needs to be a way for a user to independently verify that the data that you are putting on that website actually either comes or goes into a blockchain, so that it has those properties of trustlessness and transparency and all that. And so the front end layer was something, the experience, the user experience, I figured out it was something that was completely missing. And I said, you know what? I am also a designer. I should bring also that mindset that I've been working on for my whole life into Ethereum. And so I started thinking about what could a designer say in this space that was so technical and still at the very bare metal protocol level. And I wrote these Web3 design principles. I made some conjectures. I tested it with some friends, my friends from the design studio. I used them as guinea pigs. I have friends that know nothing about Ethereum or the blockchain. I send them things to see and do and monitored and looked, and we had the conversations about decentralization. What does it mean, etc. And some of them are very cynical, you know. So I had some parameters about things that users, newbies, would think and do interacting with the product. And so I wrote these Web3 design principles. It took me like 3 months to gather all the information and structure the ideas. And there's a lot about trust, you know, how do you bring that trust to the front layer through transparency? And that would say I kickstarted my design career in Ethereum, because I said, you know, I will never be a good Ethereum developer, but I can be a very good Ethereum designer. And I said, we need more designers. So I started talking. There was also Sarah Mills, so you should interview her as well. She had written a few articles also on blockchain and blockchain design. And so I had some conversations with her, and little by little, we started forming a community of designers, saying, hey, you're not alone, you know, we need to bring more this idea that we need to focus on design and designers and users especially. And so there were the two areas: educating designers that know nothing about technology, which unfortunately in this space, they need to know about a bit of the technology and they need to understand how the technology works. It's the idea that normally designers have is to hide away the technology. In this space is not yet, nor the time, nor for me, I think, appropriate, you know. There are moments in which to hide the technology, but there are ideas. There's decentralization is a brand new mental concept, you know. And there's mechanics that we discovered are also brand new, like the idea that your data is not owned by a company, a server, but it's shared. Users have a hard time understanding this. And so it needs to be dealt in its own way.
So what's the reason why we're not in a place yet where we can try to hide that tech under the hood, like you're saying designers tend to do? Is it about trust? Is it about just making it like you're saying here, like making it clear that the data is what it says it is, and it's, you know, this person is who they say they are? Is it something else?
Well, there's different layers. On one is the actual technology right now, the way in which we interact with it. It's very hard and requires a lot of learning. In crypto, understanding keys, understanding browser plugins
Sure.
that are difficult. This was at 2018, and in part still is. Right now, we've made a lot of work. There's a lot of people who created new patterns, and there is a way to hide these technologies. Actually, in this research that I've been doing for the Web3 design system, which is a library of components and this design, or the material design library for the Web3, okay? We've
Sure.
been interviewing a lot of companies, and inside of these insights or this learnings, we discovered that there are 2 or 3 different techniques for the problems that people have, okay? So on one layer, yes, if you can hide the technology like gas and gas price, it was a very successful result with users if you hid those choices. You made expert choices for them. Mist did this at the beginning, simplified it. Maybe MetaMask also had the fast, slow, fast, or medium, or whatever. And there are progressively things that we can put in this bucket of hiding, okay? Mm-hmm. On top of it, there are technicalities that relate to decentralization, okay? Like, for example, let me find it here. I had something around gas as well. Maybe I can show you with an image as well.
Sure.
That's going to be...
A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah. Web3 design decision-making framework. Let me share this here with you. Okay, share. So without giving you the whole speech, which is online, we did at Aracon. We are creating the usability, okay? And let me jump to the problems, okay? So there are 3 types of solutions, okay? Things that you can hide, things that you need to explain better. For example, in gas, what is gas price, all these things. If you can, you just hide them away, okay? But people sometimes will ask why gas has different costs. Why this transaction that I executed yesterday and today cost me different values, okay? Who is getting that money? So that thing, you cannot hide it away. You just need to make a better explainer. Or there was a misunderstanding. A lot of people thought that gas was given to the app or to the EF in some cases, to the foundation. And so there as well, it relates to how the whole decentralization technology works. And right now you need to make a better explainer of that. And even if we're not going to get rid of the gas model, one day you still need to explain them. You are paying for someone to validate your thing. People understand transactions cost money, but some of them want to know where that money goes.
Of course, it's a natural question to ask.
Yeah. So these are kind of the questions that that arise. And to go back to your idea, we cannot hide it because sometimes it's a technological problem. We don't know yet how to hide it, okay?
Yep.
Some other times it's because we need to explain it and we should not hide it.
Yep.
And so that's why we can't hide everything. But there are more and more solutions, especially if we get a lot of things onto layer 2, for example, that can make the interaction feel like Web 2 as much as possible. Universal logins and ENS started giving the simple names to these IP addresses of the Web3, which are the account addresses. Now, layer 2 is also giving fast interactions, fast transaction and cheap transactions, but with the security of layer 1 technology. So right now I'm focused on layer 2 solutions. And after ENS, I didn't mention I worked on ENS for 1 year. and I've recently transitioned into this project called Abridged, which aims to onboard humanity onto the decentralized web by delivering tools for developers and for users, tools that make developing Web3 as simple as doing it with Web2. So James Young, who is the creator of this tech stack, you should interview him because what he's done is out of out of this world. It's super amazing. It's frankly another next level shit.
Can we just close the screen sharing here? I just want to make sure that you're visible here in the video. The Web3 design principles was the first piece of your work that I encountered, and I was very, very impressed by it at the time. Of course, we hadn't even met in person, and when we did meet, I was thrilled to meet the genius behind the project. I'm not a designer, obviously, but I have a bit of a product mindset just as an entrepreneur, you know, who was building kind of web and mobile software prior to Ethereum, and I think that bringing design thinking to Web3 is one of the most important things that we can be doing. You know, really amazingly thankful to have folks such as yourself and the other folks you mentioned who are bringing this important thinking to the space, because so much of it has been built by technologists for technologists, and we've kind of left out the idea of kind of the end user and the use case and the need and the product and all that kind of critical stuff. So thank you on behalf of the whole community for that work.
Thank you for being design sensible, or sensible design.
so important. And I feel like we could start an entire podcast series just talking about Web3 design, because that's such an important topic as well. But yeah, so let's talk more about the work you're doing today. Just bring us up to the present, I guess, with your story.
So after working on ENS, bringing it into a usable state, because the first version was super problematic. Like 99% of people lost money trying to register a domain.
99%, that's incredible.
Yeah. And the only person that didn't lose money that I've interviewed, sorry, this in the people that I've interviewed, okay, only one person didn't lose money, but because he was stressed all time. And at the time we had the Victory auction like 5 days long.
Right.
And so he was stressed during 5 days. So I've worked to simplify the process and the managing of the domain, and there's a lot of new other things. There's the new instant registration pattern. There is the short name auction that is going to come.
That started today, I think, actually.
The short name reservation period
yes.
started today, yes. So if you have a domain that fits the parameters of the reservation, you can claim it ahead of time. And but you should read the instructions there on the page.
We'll include a link to that in the show notes. I think that's live until August 10th, if I remember correctly. So there's still some time there. Also, the presentation that you just gave a snapshot of, the really awesome Web3 design principles, I think that's also online. So we'll include a link to that as well. Awesome, cool.
I'll give you the links. And we made also another project with IPFS to enable the fact that you can easily put a name and on your browser, and it resolves to the IPFS content that the domain points to.
Cool.
A lot of people don't know what ENS domains are for,
right.
And this is one of the use cases.
Actually, so for folks who aren't familiar, can you just introduce ENS and just let people know what it is and what it's designed to do?
Yeah, so ENS, of course, is the child of Nick Johnson, which you should interview. He created all these things and is one of the top developers in the space. And ENS is what the DNS system is. Computers on the internet talk via IP addresses, like the numbers, 192.168, etc. But we humans use on top of it this naming system that can allow me to query lanerating.com and get the awesome website or whatever. And ENS is the same thing for Web3 or for Ethereum address or accounts. It can do a lot more. So if you have a hash, it can be turned into a human readable name, and you can have names Beltran.com, Beltran.eth, or subdomains, Beltran.Berrocal.eth,
Yep.
and other things, or ipfs.mysite.eth or whatever. And so this is an awesome tool that works in the direction of giving good UX, okay? And
But
this is
unlike,
why
so
also I
DNS,
joined unique.
DNS is a highly centralized system, but the important point here is that ENS is a truly decentralized system, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And ENS and Nick, of course, are obsessed about fully decentralization. Sometimes it would make sense to put a tiny degree of centralization to make the user's life easier, but he's a purist on that, and there's degrees.
In our interview with TJ in the last episode, his piece of advice to the Ethereum community, and I'll ask you this at the end, so start thinking about yours now, right? His thing was fully embrace decentralization from the beginning, because every time you hear someone say, well, we'll decentralize later, you kind of roll your eyes and you're kind of like, yeah, you probably won't ever get there. So I think that that's definitely in line with the ethos of Ethereum.
Yeah, absolutely. I am pro decentralization, and I've been defending that it's also one of the value propositions that will differentiate a Web3 app from a Web2 app of the same type and product. You know, if we have a decentralized Facebook versus a centralized Facebook, the only value proposition that is different is the decentralization. So you need to explain it to the user and sell it to the user somehow, make it visible. And I've been debating in the community about this. There's a lot of the other side of people that say people don't care about decentralization. I say it's true. They don't care, and probably they will not care, most of them. But if we want to differentiate, we should educate and bring people to understand the different values. It's a cultural movement, and it will take generations, technology, social movements, etc. So there's a lot about that. Totally. And in the Web3 design system research also, I came to realize that it's okay to have progressive decentralization. Or different degrees of centralization, especially for new users. Because if you give everything decentralized right at the beginning, you will lose them. Right now, we don't have real users in the space because there's so much friction to using it. Like getting crypto, the KYC, 15 days after you come back, you need to understand browser plugins, not anymore, thankfully. Start to understand the new concept, the transaction, what is a nonce, all these things. So only the truly hyper motivated people get to that point. And we need everybody. I want my mother and my brother to be on decentralized technology.
So this is the concept of crossing the chasm, to borrow the kind of Silicon Valley terminology here, right? Is we have these early adopters, these pioneers today, but if we want to cross that chasm into mainstream users, all these things have to become much more usable.
Exactly, exactly. And I am working in this space because I want that. I want humanity to start using this technology, this new way of coordinating and thinking society, because I think it has a potential to redesign power. To rearrange behaviors that today we think they're normal, but in 20 years we say, how did we think about that? You know, how were we doing? How crazy? You know, like we think about in the 50s they were using lobotomies or electroshocks to treat neurological patients, and today we think that's barbaric. You know, I think we will think something about the opaqueness of politics, the difficulty of organizing or getting the transparency that we deserve on the common good. I think this is a technology that is spot on for the common good. There are a lot of cases also for the private venture that are interesting to explore. And this is why also what we are doing today with a bridge excites me so much, because we are building the bridge. We're building a shortcut for developers that know nothing about Web3 to start developing Web3 apps, okay, with their current knowledge. They don't need to learn to be involved in the space and learn about this moving technology, understand all the concepts,
Sure.
reading thousands of papers and spending 1 year learning or understanding. You know, they can use an SDK, which James Young wrote, that allows to write as if you were using a normal Web2 API. Very, very simple, very fast. And on the other side, these developers are a way to produce apps. We need to start to talk about apps that give users a real tool so that users will start using them. We need to talk to users and not only infrastructure. Infrastructure is fundamental. There's so many
Sure.
big problems that are unsolved yet, okay, and are juicy and interesting and amazing and fascinating. But we also need at the same time to start talking to users, also because maybe we are doing as a whole ecosystem the newbie entrepreneur problem. You know, they say talk to users. Maybe users can guide some of these choices for the infrastructure.
Sure. You know? Well, yeah, in fact, I think I touched upon this before when I was telling you why I think that your work is so important. But as someone who's very involved in building the infrastructure, I feel quite strongly that we haven't considered the user or the use case enough. And it's easy to lose sight of, you know, to feel excited about what we're building, and, you know, we're building something for ourselves, and lose sight of the fact that there, as you said a moment ago, there aren't really any like real users or real apps to speak of yet. And so I think that platforms like a bridge can actually have a very large role to play in crossing that chasm. So I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah. It's we are slowly onboarding a lot of apps.
Cool.
There is developers that are coming, and since we want to help developers, there is also a section about DAOs. We want to go back and explore technically and legally also the way to make DAOs the fundraising mechanism for the apps.
Interesting.
So the DAICO that Vitalik imagined, we are trying to implementing it with the idea of claim tokens, so that people, the token holders, can vote and be part of the app itself.
Sure.
And have a control, a real control, which is unlike the ICO times, where if you read the term of services, you were simply donating money without anything, with a promise in return. And so we are also trying to develop that part, which we think it's important also to test and experiment. Also, James is the creator, or one of the creators of Moloch, and there is the Meta Cartel DAO. It's a fork of Moloch, so James wrote the Moloch, and the Meta Cartel DAO app, the one that you will use, is one of the apps built with the SDK that James built.
Cool.
So
good to know. We're planning to speak to Peter, and I want to learn more about Metacartel. I'd love to speak to James as well as part of this series. There's some really important, underappreciated work going on here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, both James Young and James Duncan also, they work a lot on this app DAO concept. And we are four people. The fourth one is Eric Chung, is a developer known for the Dapper network. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yep.
And we are trying to bridge the chasm, or cross the chasm, by onboarding developers and users for the apps that these developers can create.
Cool. That is such an exciting project, and it's fortunate of them to have you on the team, and that speaks volumes to how important this project is, and you know, the chance of really having a big impact here. So I'm excited to hear about that. I learned about that today, that you're working on a bridge today, so that's really exciting. I'm excited to hear about the work being done on DAOs. That's something that's a personal area of interest for me, and I think that There's a lot of work to be done there on kind of DAO fundamentals and primitives and composability of DAOs and things like that. So I'm really excited to kind of see how that work progresses. Let's change gears a tiny bit here. I have a next question for you, and this is a bit of an impossible open-ended question. So, and you kind of actually have touched upon this already. What does Ethereum mean or represent to you?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I've touched on it. Ethereum for me is the door to that new vision of a new kind of society or new social norms. That idea of redesigning power, okay, in different layers and places. And it took me some time too, of course, like it takes a lot of people who enter the space to understand what this thing is, you know?
Sure, yeah.
I call it the monolith, the black monolith phase, like the black monolith of 2001 Space Odyssey, where you see monkeys banging on this beautiful black monolith. It means they don't understand this future technology.
Yeah.
It takes us as well some time to understand what decentralization really means. And possibly we don't know it all yet. There's a lot to discover still. Although we kind of begin to have, as a collectivity, as a group, as an ecosystem, we started to have the language and the perception about these parameters and values, okay? We, developers or creators, not yet the people outside. So Ethereum is that it's a tool for that. But of course, the blockchain is one side of the technology. There is all the other cases like the DAO. The DAO could be built on any blockchain or any other tool, even centralized technology, although probably it would not have the same properties.
Sure.
That emerged from this cauldron of ideas and mixing and potential and new properties. So there's a lot of emergence that still needs to happen I think, you know, those primitives that you were looking for. There's a lot of unsolved primitives. There's a lot of things to test still to see if it works or not.
Definitely.
Like, I don't know, the bonding curves or TCRs or other systemic mechanisms to design. And that's also another thing that brought me to Ethereum, the fact that I've always been looking more at a strategic and behavioral design and teaching that also in university. And actually designing a token system is that you're designing an interaction between different parties that have different behaviors and you want outcomes and through incentives or negative feedbacks if you want.
Mechanism design, that's something that I've found incredibly fascinating. It's something that I've come to for the first time through Ethereum as well, or incentive design. What do they call it? They call it, it's like game theory in reverse or something. You start with the outcome you want, and then you like figure out programmatically, you work backwards and figure out how to like incentivize those behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. So mechanism design is the behavioral economic field that studies this. There is also one part of mechanism design that is research in design, and we call it either service design or system design, okay? And it has a long-lasting story, this discipline. I was teaching system design in Politecnico in 2003. So it was before the blockchain idea existed.
What's so interesting, so that's another field that I've also been exposed to a little bit through the work of folks like Michael Zargam and you know, Block Science, his organization, as well as many of the other, you know, kind of brilliant people who are doing work in that area. What's fascinating about this conversation that we're having right now is I just had this synapse form where I realized that the word design is part of it, right? When I think of mechanism design or systems design, I never connected it back to things like visual, or I guess it'd be more closely related to UX design. But it really is a form of design. And so we really need to apply the same sorts of design thinking, you know, that we've been talking about to those sorts of things. It's such a simple idea, but it's a very powerful idea.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a whole part of the conversation that we could have around the word design and the
Sure.
meaning, and why the English word is unsatisfactory or
Interesting.
incomplete.
Is it better or different in Italian or Spanish, or do you
Well,
know
you
the difference?
use design, of course, you use the English word as well, but design comes from the Latin designum, out of the sign. So it represents that idea that it's only a visual thing. But
Right.
actually, design, the real word that we use in Italian is progetto, project. And
Ah,
project comes
wow.
from Latin as well, which means project, to throw ahead into the future
Yeah.
something. So to
Yeah.
project is to imagine something that does not exist into the future and creating it in today.
Wow.
So
I'm having another aha moment here. This is another kind of head exploding, stare at the wall moment, like when I first learned about Ethereum. That is really incredibly insightful and incredibly deep. Um, Language is so fascinating. Sometimes looking at the limitations, and you need to kind of go to other languages sometimes. But design is
yeah,
about, it's
absolutely.
not just visual, for sure.
Uh,
Well, okay, I think we're going to need another hour to explore that topic.
yeah.
um, but there is something we didn't speak about yet that I definitely wanted to save some time to talk about, because it's one of the goals of this series of conversations, and that's about funding.
Mm.
And I think that there's a few angles that you could approach this from, but I do know, for example, that as part of the Web3 design principles work that you were doing, there were some grant applications. So feel free to answer this question in the context of that work, or in the context of the work you're doing today, or ENS, or any of these things. Just what are your thoughts on kind of how funding is working in our ecosystem, and what sorts of things are working, what sorts of things are not working, or could we do better with?
So yeah, funding was a big topic also for myself. Coming from a foundation, I know what it means, professional begging. I call it like that, grant writing
Yeah.
and helping. So of course, when grants came out from the EF or from the ECF at the time, and from other organizations like Aragon, we jumped on it, and it looked like a good way to give back. You know, you raise tons of money through an ICO, in even more than a normal startup would need. It also grew a lot of the money. It made sense for the ecosystem to give back. Awesome.
Yep.
Uh, it was a bit of disorganization in all the institutions that gave grants, because nobody had that experience on one side, and there were a lot of things to figure out. I have to admit, or have to say, Aragon was top level in their process of doing everything hyper transparently, also well structured. And we got a grant from Aragon in the end. We didn't get it from the ECF, we didn't get it from the EF. And of course, we needed to restructure 5 times the project also, and we didn't get it in the end. We got it from Aragon. Then crypto winter came, and a lot of the grants had to be cut down, ours as well. And so we only got one part, and the whole project, the whole research needed to be restructured. Right now, I think the grants, although the EF is giving, the foundation is giving interesting sums of money to a lot of people, including TJ, and the EWASM team. So important projects, I think, also.
Sure.
There's a bit of a disconnect between the idea of transparency and the purposes. You know, why are we funding this? And so this is why naturally from the ecosystem, other solutions like Moloch DAO came out. I think that's an amazing project, and it's so good. I'm sad I cannot be part of it because I don't have 100 tokens to 100 ETH to.
Yeah, me too. Although I've had some back and forth on this, and in theory, I think they have begun admitting some people with smaller sums of money to what's the word they use, tribute to be paid.
Yeah.
I do think that Moloch is a really exciting development, and we need to give it a chance to kind of find its feet and have the impact that it has potential to have. But I also think it hasn't actually given many grants yet, so it's going to be interesting to kind of see what happens. And I'm I have a healthy skepticism there because there is no profit motive involved. And so I kind of wonder what that's going to look like over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it has, in my knowledge, it has given a couple of
Okay.
grants outside for tiny research. Of course, Moloch is focused on ETH 2.0 research, I think. This is what I gathered. And so this is why also Peter and others started and forked, and James Young as well, forked the Moloch DAO
Yep.
into the Metacartel DAO, which says, hey, we need to start talking to apps and developing apps and helping the front end that users will use. And so that is another way. And I think they are an emergent way, this permissionless mechanism that the blockchain or decentralized technology enables also changes the mindset. You know what? I don't need to wait for you.
Exactly.
I just do. I fork you.
Yeah, we need, I was going to say we need that on a t-shirt, but I'm sure it already exists. I'm sure someone in the Bitcoin community got to that before.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a really important point to make. Really, 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 I want to just hammer this point home again, that there are no gatekeepers here, right? So you referred to grant applications to EF and ECF, et cetera, that didn't go through. I think a lot of people would stop there and kind of give up and say, well, I tried and I failed. But another way to look at the situation is to say that we have resources and we can be creative here, and it's a permissionless ecosystem. So maybe we need to go build some new structure. And I do think that Moloch and Metacartel have some exciting ideas here. So I'm excited to see how that happens as well.
Yeah, and it fits one situation which I think is sad in the current state of the ecosystem, which is, for example, I'm amazed that someone like Austin Griffith cannot get a grant to develop, for example, the burner wallet that has demonstrated to be one of the catalysts for adoption. I'm really amazed that big companies or big ecosystem funds did not support Austin. And so that makes me think that even though we have the permissionless, even though we have grants mechanism and there is a lot of money in the system, there is still some social mechanism that is not working, the idea promoted by Vitalik and in the last research they published, I forget right now the name. It's midnight.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so we're talking now about the CLR funding, the matching that was done through Gitcoin. This is based on the work of Glenn and kind of the radical markets ideas. Yep. Exactly,
the CLR.
Yep.
So that is an interesting mechanism. It has a lot of flaws that need to be solved, I think, but it talks about this idea of funding the public good, you know?
Yes.
And I would like to see if it working somehow. I don't think it's the right mechanism in the end, or at least for what I've seen so far, has not had good or great successes. And so in all this situation, there are emergent teams that say, hey, we do it, we fork you, we do it, we try to look for the money, okay? And also in our little chapter, if you want, we are saying we also need to find a legal way to fundraise.
Definitely.
To go back the old route of companies fundraising for developing a product is not only grants, it's also a for-profit venture. And so DAOs can help that process as well.
Definitely.
And we, with a bridge, we are focusing on that niche that is still missing, possibly. There are a lot of experiments with DAO, a lot of players, and I love that. But concrete to say, we have the dApps, we have the developers that want to build a dApp, we help them also fundraise because we have the mechanism, which is not the ICO.
Yeah, so it's funny, we were speaking about Aragon before. They just released a couple months ago the Aragon fundraising platform, which I think is built on that DAICO idea as well. So I think that DAOs and platforms like Aragon and Abridged as well, I'm sure have a role to play here in hopefully beginning to address some of this frustration, we have around good projects getting funded. I'm also happy you mentioned Austin. I actually kicked off this series. The very first conversation that I did was with Austin for exactly that reason, because I think he's the most obvious example of a project that is so unbelievably important and has also kind of struggled to attract funding.
Yeah, exactly. So sad. What new things did you learn from the Austin interview? Oh, I'm deactivating your call.
You're breaking through the what do they call it in theater? Breaking the third wall here or something,
the
or
third
fifth
wall.
wall. I can't remember what it's called. That episode is going to go live in the next day, so I'll share it with you, and I'll let Austin kind of tell you that story himself.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, so we're coming up to an hour. I have 3 final questions for you, so kind of rapid fire questions here. The first one is, what advice do you have for newcomers to the ecosystem?
Newcomers, users, or developers?
All the above. Okay. I guess one answer is use a bridge. That's good.
Use a bridge, exactly. So learn and play with it. Start slow with a bridge if you want, but we need more developers. You need to understand the stack and the ideas more than just the technology. The ideas are the revolutionary part. Cool. The technology are enablers.
I like that. That's important. One of my learnings throughout all of this, I have been a technologist my whole life, and I've always believed in the quote unquote power of technology to change the world. Really, in a very big way, I've learned in the past couple of years, largely as a result of my experiences in our community, that technology is never the end in and of itself, right? Technology is a means to an end, and it allows us to do things faster and louder, et cetera, et cetera. It increases efficiency, but it's not the solution in and of itself.
Absolutely. It needs to be recognized. The technology is fascinating. We could spend hours studying it and understanding it and brooding over it, but it's important technology. It's an important problem to hack.
Sure.
Juicy also, but we need to understand that the ideas on top are more important.
Exactly. Cool. Okay. Question number 2 is, so this is the magic moment when I hand you the microphone and I say, and I did mention this before, what is the one message that you would like to share with the Ethereum community?
With the Ethereum community. So right now, I think the Ethereum community is both made of too many developers, not too many. The majority are developers.
Yep.
I would invite everybody to start talking to users, because we are self-interested in this technology, but we are not talking to the user that will need it.
Yep.
And talk to the users also through designers. Involve designers from day 0. When you are designing your smart contract or idea, designers are from the profession, those that take care of the interests of the user. Yep. When a user is missing. Yep. So bring them in. They can help you design the ecosystem, the token, the process, the behavior, and it's better to design ahead of time than after a contract has been deployed.
I love it. That is fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that the work that you've done is a great place to get started. So take a look at the kind of show notes links for that. All right. Final question is, what other people or projects or teams do you think that are also doing good work that may be a little bit less well-known or underfunded that we should speak to as a part of these conversations?
Who are underfunded?
Well, just people doing good work in general. And yeah, we want to kind of capture, as I said, what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of projects that we hear about again and again and again.
Yes.
And I think that maybe the niche that we could fill with Humans of Ethereum, which is a permissionless, project as well. I'd love to see other people do interviews. You offered to interview me. That's great. I urge you to go forth and interview as many as you'd like. But I think that one of the niches that we can step into here is interviewing everyone else, basically.
Yes. So ENS, of course, it's close to my mind because it's a non-profit project for the ecosystem, and it's looking for some ways to self-fund. Yep. But of course, it's an important ecosystem milestone. It's a key player, let's say. Then who are also underfunded, us, a bridge we are starting, so we are trying to find a way. But avoiding the obvious, I think there are a lot of designers doing interesting work, like, for example, to bring Ethereum or crypto to communities like the Venezuelan people. There is
we spoke to Alejandro as part of this as well, and the work that they're doing at OMI is incredibly important also.
Perfect. Yeah. So that kind of work, I think it would be underfunded, whichever way you look at it.
Yep.
And it's an important project to test with the people that really need our technology.
Definitely.
Now, not us in the future. So that is that kind of project that we need to do more. And underfunded designers in general, underbelieved in general, underbelieved.
Underappreciated, I would say. Yeah,
underappreciated, yes.
Yeah. Cool. Beltran, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for sharing your story and your insights and those awesome slides as well. There's so much more we could talk about here, so we'll have future conversations dedicated to many of these things, I'm sure.
Yes. Oh, and yes, Austin needs to be more funded.
Yes, please support Austin as well. I'm going to go ahead and include the link in this show as well, maybe in all the shows, to his Gitcoin grant, so you can support the amazing Burner Wallet project.
Exactly. I'll interview you in the next chapter.
All right, cool. We'll do it. I look forward to it.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed speaking to Beltran. Tune in again this time next week for a new episode featuring an interview with another of my favorite and most interesting humans of Ethereum, Griff Green. Griff should be very well known to you as the prolific contributor and founder and builder that he is. He's been extremely active in the Ethereum community since the very beginning. He was very involved as a curator in the original DAO project, and he's launched a dozen or more initiatives since then, including Giveth and Ident3 and many, many others. Even prior to Ethereum, Griff made the conscious decision to exit from the modern centralized financial system. We talk about his backstory, which is super fascinating, and how he made that decision, and how he lived on gold and silver, and how cryptocurrency and Ethereum changed his life. We also talk about some very important, very big picture topics, such as the origin of value and economics, and how we could sort of reimagine or reshape the economy. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Have a great week, and I'll see you back here next week for the next episode of Humans of Ethereum.